gentlemen, thank you all for coming. It's my pleasure to introduce our Township Supervisor, Anne Marie Graham Hudak.
Thank you, Will. Welcome, everybody. Unfortunately, we have to have events like this at this time, as we've seen this past weekend. In light of many recent national active shooter events and acts of senseless gun violence, Canton Township is pleased to have partnered with the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration and Dr. Kenneth L. Wolf to bring you this very timely presentation. Active Shooter Survival. What is your plan? This will help individuals and businesses respond to the unthinkable. Dr. Kenneth L. Wolf is the CEO of the Incident Management Team and consults on workplace violence prevention, active shooter survival, threat assessment, and crisis management. He has consulted with companies worldwide and has presented over 800 training programs in the United States, Mexico, Canada, Brazil, Europe, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Asia. He's been a news analyst for the Detroit affiliates of ABC, NBC, and CBS Television. Dr. Wolf received his BA from Columbia College in New York and his PhD in clinical psychology from Wayne State University. So let's give a welcome to Dr. Wolf.
Thank you so much. How sad it is that we have to be here today. We're not talking about quality control, improvement of productivity. We're talking about survival. We're talking about trends that are occurring in our country that are destructive, that are upsetting, that are harmful to everyone. The program today is going to focus, in a sense, on prevention and survival. Louis Pasteur, the French scientist, said, "Chance favors the prepared mind." And when we see some of these incidents of mass violence, we say, wow, that's terrible. Sometimes we'll watch it for a minute on TV, and we go get a cup of coffee. But what is going on in the minds of those students, of those employees, of those customers in a situation where a shooting is actually occurring? We're going to go into some of the dynamics of an assault. What are the human reactions of how do human beings, civilians, respond to assault situations with the intent of trying to empower you, rather than you feel a sense of fear, powerlessness, and helplessness, and you don't know what to do. The first part of the program, though, we're going to talk about what are some of the behavioral indicators of people, because that is going to give you your preventative capability. And if you can prevent something, as opposed to you react to an active shooter situation, that would be a prime goal. So what I'd like to do, first off, is acknowledge MIOSHA. This program is funded in part by MIOSHA, and they're into the health and safety business and sharing ideas as to how do we increase worker safety, customer safety, patient, student safety in all workplaces. I want to suggest something. Neither our host, MIOSHA, myself, are ever going to say any individual should actively engage a criminal assailant. That's always going to be the individual's decision. The Department of Homeland Security, which is sort of setting out the benchmark standards, say that if you're ever in one of these low-frequency active shooter situations, your choices are to run, hide, and fight. We're going to go into choices someone could make in terms of how would you run, how would you hide, when would you fight, what is the best way in a very negative situation could you respond, for the purposes of generating ideas and choices. So if you are ever in one of these events, here in your house of worship, at Myers, in your business, you have an understanding of what are the choices you may choose to do. And these situations are unpredictable, they're sudden, and it's not like we train for this all day long. So we hope by generating choices, ideas, that will help you if you ever get involved in one of these events. There's a current landscape of anger, of harm, of threats. There's tremendous uncertainty in the country right now. There's been an erosion of cohesion and civility. If you think about it, many of us are all coming out of our cocoons. You know, we were locked into our homes, didn't go to school, didn't go to the office because of COVID. And I think that's had a tremendous impact on people. And we're social people, and the interaction, reading people's faces, tones of voice when we talk, work as a team. We get feedback, and the lack of that sometimes makes us feel more isolated and alone. And when people are alone, maybe they have fewer inhibitions. There was a 30% increase in homicides last year, 15% increase in carjackings. We're seeing this tremendous increase in active shooter. We have 44 this year versus 22 all last year. So what's happening with the fabric of restraint that kept people more civilized and maybe less violent? So we have to have an appreciation of what are the impact of some of these social factors. Price of gas, the war in Ukraine, how unsettling it could be. You know, a world leader alluding to nuclear weapons. So there's a lot of uncertainty. There are a lot of extreme ideological beliefs in this country that are fracturing what used to be a sense of purpose among us as a democracy. You know, when you look at the dollar bill, it says e pluribus unum, from many one. And yet there seem to be people who are fracturing that sense of unity in our country, and it's giving rise to offshoots of angry people, angry groups, angry movements. The internet is a megaphone for somebody to take an idea, false, contradictory, untrue, and broadcast it to try and get additional followers. And that fractures, again, the sense of purpose, the sense of group. Department of Homeland Security is now coming out with a whole bunch of studies and grants to try and look at radicalization. What is the process of radicalization? And how could grassroots communities, schools, businesses, churches identify people and try and get them to go on a different trajectory, if you will. The Buffalo shooter was certainly, and as you're reading, converted on the internet over a 2-year period. And then after romancing some of these ideas, getting involved in some of these ideological groups, he then became the lone wolf, the actor who wanted to go that further step and take action. The financial concerns. You can't buy a house these days. Rents are going so high. There's tremendous uncertainty in your workers, in your staff, in your children as students. And these things all generate feelings of uncertainty, fear maybe, and lowers the threshold, I think, of impulse control, where now we're seeing more aggressiveness and road rage. There's an interesting cartoon. Teacher says the threat of nuclear attack. Remember in the 60s, if some of you were going to school then, during the bad old days of the Cold War, students, we used to teach our children, then you heard shots in the classroom to duck and take cover. You know, the intent was if the Russians were going to bomb our cities, we didn't want to get hurt by flying glass. We might get vaporized, but we wouldn't get hurt by flying glass. This is the updated version. Kids come home from school, the mother says, "How was your school day, darlings?" Boy says, "Shots fired, many wounded, some critical, shooter still at large, unknown number of fatalities, evacuated safely, widespread panic." The brother says, "No big deal." What is the mindset? I talked to my grandson about, "What do you think about all these school shootings?" "Yeah, well, it's real scary. Sometimes I don't feel safe at school." Are we becoming numb? Are we accepting school violence? Are we accepting Oxford as a norm, as opposed to having a sense of outrage and then taking action on that outrage to implement safety awareness, safe practices in our schools, churches, businesses, so we don't become numb to the permeating violence around us? As employers, as companies, there are many concerns you have. One is harm to your employees, customers, contractors, yourselves. The scrutiny. You look at when there's an incident, people from all over, federal investigators, the media, competitors, look with a fine-tooth comb what you did or didn't do to try and prevent it. I mean, the classic case right now is Oxford with $100 million lawsuits. The parents are outraged that more wasn't done on a preventative basis. What were your procedures? What were your training? How did you prepare your workers, your students, to, when you see warning signs, take action on them? What kind of workplace violence program did you have or did you not have? Did you have a program that's a piece of paper? Or what have you done to institutionalize that program so it's really a valid one? Having a workplace violence prevention program, I think of like IRS. Anything is legal if you don't get audited. Any kind of program you may have or not have, full, minor, paper, you get away with until there's an incident. And then when there's an incident, there's going to be tremendous scrutiny and litigation. So we need to examine what is our program for prevention. There's a shattering of public confidence if there's an incident, employee morale. Why didn't you do something differently so I wouldn't have had to witness this pain in my workplace? An angry employee could be doing a lot of sabotage. We're all concerned with insider threats. 30% of the penetration of proprietary data systems are by disgruntled employees. And it can hurt our reputation and brand name. And certainly when there's an incident, there's going to be litigation. You see Santa talking to the boy and he says, "You see me when I'm sleeping, I'm awake, sounds like a case of invasion of privacy, you'll be hearing from my attorneys." You know something? This is my best joke. If you think it's easy to get jokes in a class like this, you're wrong. But the impact is everybody has every kind of responsibility often, but to be responsible to their own behaviors. The General Duty Clause is applicable to every business in Michigan and in the United States. It says employers have a responsibility to maintain a workplace free from recognized hazards that can cause injury or death in the workplace. In the old days, it meant, if you had hydrochloric gases, you had, high-tech things, and there was a leak, you had to do hazard identification, hazard mitigation, hazard control. Now what we're dealing with is people threats. When somebody threatens to kill the HR manager, or somebody threatens to harm another employee, that's an identified hazard, so we need to look at how did we, as employers, identify that person, intervene with them to try and help them help themselves and or separate them from the work environment in order to assure the safety of the workplace. OSHA came out with 4 types of perpetrators. The opportunistic criminal or gangs, that's an outsider who comes into the workplace for the purpose of committing a crime. A type 2 perpetrator is somebody receiving a service from an organization. That's usually in healthcare, teaching, where an angry patient attacks a nurse, a family member attacks a doctor, a student attacks a teacher. In the process of giving services, they're attacked by a client. The type 3 perpetrator is what we call targeted violence. It's where the perpetrator is a current or an ex or a terminated employee who comes into the workplace for the purpose of harming, usually a specific individual. The type 4 perpetrator is your domestic violence incidents, where there's a boyfriend, girlfriend, stalker, ex-partner. They come into the workplace because the predictability of one's work location and one's schedule allows the perpetrator to find the target. You know, everybody talks about, quote, the disgruntled employee. That accounts for 7% of the homicides in the workplace. 24% of the homicides are due to domestic violence cases where somebody comes in and shoots people at the workplace. Fortunately, homicide is a low-frequency event. There are about 900 a year in the United States. On the other hand, NIOSH did a study. There are 2 million assaults in the workplace every year. That's 38,000 a week. So these are higher frequency but lower lethal kinds of events that we really have to be cognizant of. And when we see warning signs of anger, aggressive behavior, we want to intervene early so that we can help somebody help themselves or separate them from the workforce. There's the 20/20 hindsight litigation rule. If there's an incident, the plaintiff attorney is going to come in and they're going to say, why did this event happen? Was there a failure in your health and safety programs? And they're going to scrutinize, what is your workplace violence prevention policy? What is your training? What is your threat assessment team functioning? Do you have systems to report that employees, customers, temps, volunteers, contractors know about? And do you handle every threat in the same way, or you just respond to some and you don't respond to others? So consistency and institutionalization of a workplace violence prevention program, and these are all based upon the OSHA violence prevention guidelines, is going to be a de facto standard. If there's an incident, you get scrutinized. We took a look at 210 active shooter events, and in 104 of them, there was no relationship between the shooter and the workplace. Just look at Buffalo last week. On the other hand, in 106, there was a relationship. 37, the shooter was an employee or a coworker. 32 was a student or former student. 12 was others. That was domestic violence. 12 were terminated, fired people. 9 were unknown. 3 were church members. What does that data tell you about prevention? Well, if in half the active shooter events, there was a previous relationship between the shooter or perpetrator and the organization had an opportunity to look at behavior, nonverbal behavior, threatening behavior, intimidating behavior, and then intervene on a preventative basis to try and help somebody help themselves or separate them from the workplace. So when somebody starts a shooting, if it's a type 1 perpetrator like we just saw in Buffalo, there's not a lot you can do. If it's a type 2, 3, or 4, there's a lot you can do if you train your people. What are the indicators to look for? And then how do we, in a supportive, preventative way, get involved? We were consultants with the U.S. Postal Service, and we helped design their national program. 2 of the people on the design team did a study of type 3, employer-directed violence. And in the 125 cases, 81% used firearms. That's not helpful. In terms of lethality, people killed, there were 125 incidents and 393 people were killed. 2/3 were killed. That's an incredible kill ratio. You know, you think about all the robberies, you think about all the carjackings, 2/3 of the people don't get killed. But in the workplace violence, type 3, it's usually targeted violence. You have somebody who's angry, they want to get angry with a work team, a supervisor, a manager, and then they go in, and then they usually try and harm and kill that person. And where the perpetrator killed one person, the suicide rate was 24%. Where the perpetrator killed 2 people or more, the suicide rate was 50%. So the last act of the plan, when they're mission-driven, is to kill themselves, not to get away. And what's frightening, what's good news and bad news, is in 85% of these cases there were warning signs that the person was going to do something violent, either in terms of threats, intimidating behavior, or other aggressive behavior. It's good news because those warning signs give us an opportunity for a preventative intervention. The bad news, if there were preventative or there were indicators we did not act on, and now we have injury or death among our workforce, there's an old curse that says, "May your life be full of attorneys." That's a joke. You know, you look at what's happening, everybody in the world is suing people in Oxford. The Aztec school shooting, which happened 2 years ago, is also now making the headlines because there were a lot of indicators, and the parents of the kids who were killed felt that the school negligently protected the people in the school. Again, birth is easier than resurrection. If we can start something from the beginning, design a system, and avoid injury or death, it's much better than trying after the fact, when you've become a headline, to try and rectify certain things which you can't undo. So the core element of setting up a violence prevention system, and I use the word system because it's not just a paper that has a policy, is you have violence prevention policies that define what is acceptable, what is unacceptable, who do you call, how will your organization manage reported threats, and also a statement of concern that we want to help all of our employees, consistent with the mission and value of our culture. You need to have employee awareness training. People know what to look for, and once you teach them what to look for, you want to have systems to report. They need to know who to call, so when they call somebody, and the benchmark standard with the FBI and OSHA is a threat assessment team, they can then start looking into how do we do a deeper dive investigation, how do we assist people, what internal, external community resources can we use, and then assess the degree and imminence of the threat, and then take action. And in an active shooter event, when an event occurs, and this is why you want to have some training and preparation, if an intruder comes in, do your employees know how to report? What are the multiple ways in an acute situation they can report? What is your emergency notification internally to notify other people at internal locations in your organization? How can you notify people who may be coming to work not to come to work? What is the process of sheltering in place? Do people know where there are safe rooms, conference rooms, copy rooms, where they can try and keep an aggressive assailant out? How do you coordinate with emergency responders, local law enforcement, fire, offices of emergency management? What is your access control? Have you done security risk audits to look at some of these kinds of issues? How do you account for people in the aftermath of a shooting so we know who is injured, who is deceased? Do you have staging areas? What are our communications in the aftermath to our internal, external stakeholders, our employees, family members, government officials? Because all these things are going to come to bear, and you want to have predetermined plans and protocols to do this. And what is our short-term recovery strategy and what is our long-term recovery strategy. It's not just bringing in grief counselors. It's how do we look at the impact of a shooting on multiple dimensions of our ability to stay in business. That's our people, our operations, our loss and risk, and our brand name. And when you have a recovery strategy, you need to address those 4 elements. And reporting works. This is a situation in New Hampshire where an employee reported a concern about a coworker.
Police say they believe a major tragedy was likely avoided here. This man allegedly told one of his co-workers, quote, he had enough firepower to take the place out and he didn't care how many people he hurt. Police believe they may have stopped just in time an active shooter. 29-year-old Corey Godinez of Derry was arrested Friday outside Lifeline Ambulance. That's where he worked until he was fired on Thursday. Police say they learned yesterday he was headed to Merrimack, so they sent officers to keep an eye on the office. And sure enough, Godinez drove by. They believe he spotted an officer that was there, drove around a cul-de-sac where the building is, and then drove away. Well, police followed him, and when they pulled him over, this is what they found: a loaded handgun and an AR-15 with several loaded magazines and extra ammo. Now he's facing multiple counts of attempted assault, threatening, and harassment. And again, police believe they may have stopped the massacre.
No one can predict with 100% certainty what would have happened, but I think based on the reported state of mind, the fact that he drove to that location, the threats that were made, and the fact that he had firearms in the car, I don't think it would be a stretch to say that we might have prevented an active shooter event from taking place there.
And you know, this is a small town in New Hampshire, just like Canton, just like Plymouth. We had done training in Pelham, New Hampshire last fall. And as we're going to Pelham, it's a little plant, 2,000 people in the town. We see a headline, minister and bride shot. The day before, a mile from the plant, there was a parishioner who was very angry. So we wanted to shoot the minister. So the minister was going to preach at noon. Guy comes in at 10. There's a wedding going on. So what he does is he decides to start his shooting early. He shoots the bride, and then he shoots the minister, and then the members of the congregation overpower him. So, you know, you can't say that this is just going to happen in the big cities, the Chicagos, the New York. It can happen anywhere where we have angry or disgruntled people. And, you know, you look at the church shooting that just happened the other day in California, where somebody had a ideological belief system that they felt justified. They're going in and harming another group who had an antithetical belief system. So the question is, what are the warning signs? What do we look for? Who are the people who are the potential angry people? And you want to differentiate between what we call targeted violence and predatory violence. Predatory violence is when somebody makes a plan, they're angry at people, they prepare for the plan, they implement the plan, and they do harm. You know, when a robber decides I need a fix or I need some money, he figures, I'm going to go to the mall, I'm going to go in some street, I'm going to find a target and rob them. So there, situational awareness is going to be your best defense versus effective violence. That's where you can have an effect on it. You have an angry customer. The customer is ventilating. You say, that's no way to talk to me, I'm going to throw you out. Or you can say, you seem very angry. How can I help you? How can we work together to solve this problem? Or you have an angry employee and you try and be empathic and listening to diffuse the anger versus you challenge him and then it exacerbates, it intensifies the anger, so it often works into an assault. When you look at almost all of the workplace violence incidents, there's a trajectory of warning signs over time. It's very rare that somebody just comes in and says, gee, I'm going to go shoot up the place. We talk about the pathway to violence, and this is DHS and FBI models. Somebody has a grievance. I'm angry, I was bullied, I was upset, and this is usually in the workplace. I'm going to go get my team, my coworkers, Then they have a violent idea. You know what? They can't treat me like this. I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm going to teach them that I'm not the person they can bully. Then they start doing research and planning. They practice, they get weapons, they go to a range, they do surveillance of a facility. Then they often look at what do I have to do when I launch my attack. Then they launch the attack. When you look at the shooter in Buffalo, he went to the store several times. He walked in and out of the store, and the security officer approached him and said, "What are you doing?" It was what we call an anomaly, an atypical kind of behavior. And when you see it, you want to be situationally aware and then try following up. And the guy then just left. But he was doing surveillance and preparation. So in effective violence, somebody gets angry, they have an idea, and then they impulsively act out. In targeted violence, which we see in most of the active shooter events, the missing part is the research, planning, and preparation. Buying weapons, buying guns, figuring out a timeline. And if we can identify people either through their writing, social media, who seem to be doing this, and if employees notice this, like in this case in New Hampshire, they report it, we have an opportunity for prevention. And remember, violence is a process. It's not an event. The event is when the shooting or the assault starts. The process is what is the planning, the anger, the smoldering resentments that reaches a point where somebody crosses the level of impulse control and then initiates an attack. And we said that people don't snap, they plan. This is the shooter in Buffalo, okay, on his internet. This is in March, okay, the shooting happened the other day. Make a goodbye list, because he figured he was going to get killed. Look at the premeditation and planning. Link hotspot to computer, test live stream with home computer. If you recall, he put this on the web, and 22 people were watching when he did it. And he read the writings of the shooter in New Zealand who did the same thing. He put his whole shooting event on the web. Take out some Winchester ammo, make sure they run in full mags. Organize my stuff at home. Put passenger seat all the way back. Mossberg, passenger seat, that's a shotgun. Then he says, the same day, continue writing manifesto. He wrote a 180-page manifesto talking about all of his resentments, talking about his hatred of immigrants, minority groups, and he followed the manifestos of the shooter in the school in Norway, where he killed 77 kids, and then also the fellow in New Zealand. Assemble a full kit, write 4chan, 8chan, and Discoast. These are some of the controversial websites that deal with usually extremist groups, neo-Nazi supremacist groups. Make the goodbye list, and then go to the Springs for the last time, because he knows he's not coming back, so he was willing to die for the cause. Make additional downhill lists and make sure that when I do the shooting, the broadcasting is going to work. I mean, this is real premeditation. This is a shooter in a plant in Ohio. And what he did was, on the left, you see ETA, estimated response time, and in the top middle, police department. So he figured that the police would be on site in 3 minutes, so he had 3 minutes to kill as many people as he could. And then he talks about, over here in the middle, intense aversion of people, I hate people, began long ago. I used to have a fear of them, no more fear now. He decided to act out his fear and hatred of people. And then he said, start small, buy a stun gun, folding knives, research firearm laws, buy handguns, committed, buy a shotgun, an AR-15, second handgun, and explosives. So you see, a lot of these people just don't, blow up. They plan, they look at how to prepare, then they launch their initiated attacks. And if any point we know what to look for by looking at their social media reading some of their statements or talking to them, we have a preventative opportunity to get them to reframe what they're doing. And very often, coworkers, people, they don't pay attention. There's no problem here because they want to be an ostrich. They don't want to get involved. The Secret Service came out with something called the Bystander Study. They looked at all the school shootings, and 98% of the school shooting, the kids told other kids they were going to launch the attack. And the bystander study is, how do we motivate students? And by extension, how do you motivate your employees, your contractors, if you see warning signs to report it rather than to say, oh, I don't want to get involved? And I think now, with all the violence in the workplace, employees are much more willing to report behaviors of concern. So if you see something, say something. This was all over New York after 9/11, and in your company, if you have 100 people, you got 200 sets of eyes. So we have to train our employees what to look for and who to call. When we look at the attacker motivations, usually one is revenge. They feel that they've perceived an injury or a violation of their status, their belief systems, their pride. Sometimes it's a quest for justice. You want to become a warrior for a cause. The guy in Buffalo was a warrior for a cause. He's into this replacement theory, which is all over the internet, and it's very controversial right now. I'll go into it in a few minutes. And the shooter in Charleston in the Baptist church, he was a neo-Nazi white supremacist, and he shot 8 people. The 9th person, he said, I'm not going to shoot you because I want you to tell the world what I did. He wanted notoriety for the cause. If you look at the manifesto the Buffalo shooter talked about, it was all against immigration. The replacement theory is, if countries let in too many immigrants, they're going to breed, they're going to have too many votes, and ultimately they're going to push out, our group from power, so we have to stem the tide, kill them, hurt them, limit them from coming in. There's a lot of buzzwords. If you looked at January 6th, a lot of the people who were invading the Capitol had a similar belief system. You saw it in some of the other social unrest movements. So it's a very significant issue that we're dealing with now as a society. Sometimes people commit these acts because they want recognition. They lead lives of quiet desperation. If I do this, I'll be famous. Everybody will know who I am. Sometimes they're very depressed and they want to be killed, so they set up a situation where the police will come and shoot them. There are behaviors that make people uncomfortable. As a thought, the problem with the prediction of violence is you can't do it. We don't have enough base rates on data to predict who will be violent. On the other hand, if we see behaviors that we see in other people who then cross that line and act it out, we want to intervene in a helping way to make sure that they don't go on a trajectory which winds up in harm. People who make veiled threats, it's going to be a sad day at the school. It's an ominous statement, but they don't make a specific threat to an identifiable target or a conditional threat. If my manager disciplines me, I'm going to go get him or her in the parking lot. Direct threats, I'm going to kill you. That's pretty obvious. There's a fascination with violent perpetrators. When you look at a lot of the shooters, they go online, they look at Columbine, they look at New Zealand, they look at who these other perpetrators are. They often study their techniques and then they try and outdo them, or they make references to other kinds of violent events. With all the stresses here, I bet you somebody can go postal. What they're doing is, and when we hear that now, that gets our attention. But what is the mindset of that person? And maybe that's the kind of violence that they're thinking of doing, and then certainly domestic violence. So potentially, difficult people are people who are mentally ill. They may have emotional problems. People on high amounts of drugs. People who are distraught or suicidal. People who make threats of homicide or suicide. Maybe at some point they may actually carry those threats out. Threats on social media. Social media is a megaphone to put out all kinds of thoughts, feelings, emotions, and to identify with people who may think alike, and then you become a community online, and the recruitment of people. Al-Qaeda was doing this, with Iraq, and the proselytization, the converting of new minds into their causes is a very significant outcome of people paying attention to social media. You have the insider threat and potential terrorists. Bizarre communications when people say things that suggest potentially mental health problems, or intimidating or frightening comments about weapons. It's not that you have or own weapons. When you go to Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and people grow up with weapons, you talk to some of the people, say, my granddaddy said that's a weapon. You never point it at anything you don't want to kill. There's a discipline in terms of how that weapon will be used and respected. The shooter in the Dearborn post office was angry that he didn't get a promotion, so he filed a grievance, an EEO complaint. And he goes up to the woman who got the promotion, and he says to her, by the way, I've been practicing with speed loaders to see if I can fire my revolver as fast as a semi-automatic 9mm. Now, you make that statement at a range, it's a sign of skill accomplishment. You say it in the workplace to a woman who just got the promotion you felt you were entitled to, it's a sign of intimidation. So you always want to look at the context in which certain kinds of statements are made. Statements that generate fear in others. When we'll come on site and we'll do an investigation and they'll say, well, so-and-so, was making threats. We'll talk to coworkers and you read their behavior, and when somebody works for weeks, months, years with a person, and now all of a sudden they're feeling uncomfortable, they're feeling frightened, you want them to put into words what are the changes in that person's behavior that are making you feel uncomfortable, because they're probably reading verbal or nonverbal kinds of behaviors that qualitatively are causing them to feel concerned. People who have a special interest in police, survivalistic, fascist, neo-Nazi, extremist kinds of groups, they may become the true believer that acts out the hate methodology of that cause, as we just saw in Buffalo. The person ideologically in the church in California, was pro-China, anti-Taiwanese, so he felt he was entitled to go kill these kinds of people. Let's take a look at how this comes out in Oregon. There was a shooter who shot up a school. When you looked at his media, social media, and social media is and we're going to talk about the concept of emotional leakage. Anything somebody writes, emails, voicemails, plays, drawings, is a roadmap into their mind. So when you do a threat assessment, you want to look at what have they written so you can understand their thinking.
Law enforcement officials say he was struggling with mental illness issues, and he left behind a chilling final message revealing himself as someone who believed the whole world was against him. NBC's Pete Williams has been digging into his past.
Law enforcement officials say Chris Harper Mercer wrote a long, hate-filled document found at the scene of the shooting. According to those who've seen it, he said he'd be welcomed in hell, embraced by the devil, and lamented that he was in a bad way, that the world was against him, that he had no life, no girlfriend. He also showed a detailed interest in other mass shootings and wrote on an internet blog about the recent shooting of a TV reporter and photographer, saying of that gunman, quote, "So many people like him are all alone and unknown, Yet when they spill a little blood, the whole world knows who they are.
Okay, what are the warning signs? He said, the world is against me, looks like paranoia. He said, you spill a little blood, the whole world knows who you are. So notoriety, you become famous. Then what did he do? He studied Columbine. He studied the shootings. Remember we said identification with other perpetrators of violence, of the TV reporter and the newscaster, photographer, because he felt they must have been justified in doing what they did.
Mercer attended this Southern California school for emotionally troubled children, then moved with his mother to Oregon 2 years ago. Neighbors say it was obvious he was troubled.
I thought he was kind of an odd guy.
Odd guy. Remember people who make bizarre statements? The shooter in the Dearborn post office filed a grievance against coworkers because he was angry about how loudly the coworkers played their radio. So most of the time you say, shut the damn radio off or I'll break it if you don't turn it down. What he did in his grievance, he said, the radio waves were penetrating my brain. When you hear bizarre statements like that, it's maybe indicative of some mental health problems. You don't want to make a diagnosis, but maybe you want to have HR go talk to the person, just say, gee, you know, how are you experiencing that? Because if there is a mental health issue, we want to refer somebody to get help. So when you interview coworkers, staff, patients, students, and somebody makes a statement, say, wow, that's an interesting statement. How did you mean that? It's not whether somebody made a threat or not. You want to see what are the ancillary thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are making people additionally uncomfortable.
Kind of like a grown little kid. He would have tantrums if something didn't go his way.
On his own social media, he showed a fascination with the military and the Irish.
On his social media and in his room, and this is very important, remember we said identification with the extremist groups or causes? Over there, British Army could not defeat the IRA, and then you get all these kinds of people with the guns and the frightening stuff. Would you rather be the quiet guy that no one knows about in the lower right, or would you rather be one of these tough guys? I identify with these. I'm a tough, serious actor. You better respect me. And what you're going to see, we're going to meet another person where to deny their powerlessness and helplessness, they often identify with these extremist groups, saying, I'm one of the chosen, I'm one of the powerful. Certainly, you're seeing all this stuff coming out in the Buffalo guy. We saw it in this person. So these are indicators you train people to look for. People who document others. These are the causes of my behavior. If it wasn't for Joe and Mary, this team, I would be fine. And when somebody makes a list, what is a list? A list is premeditation. These are my enemies. These are the people I'm going to get. So if you're interviewing a coworker and they say, well, I got a list of everybody who's screwing up, that should be a big, big red flag for you to, get involved as to what are they talking about? Why are there people on the list? And how can we sort of do conflict resolution so you don't harm the people? And then threatening communication on social media, voicemails, emails, drawings, photographs. These are some of the threatening communications. This was from one of the shooters at Columbine. You see the fellow with the, lightning rod guns, horrible images coming out. Over in the lower left, decapitated heads, explosions killing people. Here, rifles shooting, mowing down people here, using automatic weapons to kill people. And what is that person thinking? And when you get into creativity, are we dealing with the next Stephen King, or are we dealing with the next mass murderer? This was some of the writing from the shooter in Oxford. I have no use of my life. Help me. I will warn some of my friends not to come to school. He premeditated, he knew he was going to go do the shooting. And then he says, I love my parents, I hate my life. And then he talks about all of his grievances. And then he says, once I start my shooting, when the police come, I'm going to put down my weapon because I want to live to look at the consequences. And then I want to see how famous I am. When the kid was in jail, he was asking the people who imprisoned him, am I getting any fan mail? Because, a lot of times people identify with these individuals. So he was doing it for notoriety. This was the writing of another student who was a shooter, Kill Mankind. It's this tremendous hatred. And you take this hatred, you externalize it, and you use it as a justification to kill other people. This was a fellow who was a shooter in North Carolina. And you go to his website, and it had all this fascination with weaponry, and then he would talk about his anger against his company. When we talked about lists, how does that play out? This is UCLA.
Police in Minnesota are now talking about a possible hit list that the alleged UCLA shooter may have had. Los Angeles police say Manak Sarkar killed mechanical engineering professor William Klug in an office on campus before taking his own life. Minnesota authorities said they were asked by the LAPD to perform a welfare check on a woman who was possibly connected to the shooting. Officers also finding the woman dead with a gunshot wound.
What I can tell you is we believe at this point that she was deceased prior to the UCLA shooting. But because we're so early in the investigation, the timing we don't know exactly at this point.
Officials say the woman was on the...
So what happened is this graduate student felt that the professors were stealing his intellectual product. So he goes to the office, he kills one of the professors, the other didn't come to work that day, so he wasn't harmed. The student then kills himself. Police find the list. They do a welfare check on the woman on the list who is in Minnesota, and he already shot her. The learning I want you to come away with is if you hear people talking about lists, that becomes a very significant warning sign. This was one of the shooters at Columbine, class of '98, top of the should have died list. So, those are real serious indicators. You want to always look at behaviors, not profiles. Not somebody has 43 nose rings, green hair, tattoos. You look at what they do. And also, when you have a workplace violence prevention policy, you define what is acceptable and unacceptable behaviors and what is the threshold at which you will do fact-finding to see if they violated the policy. And very often these individuals collect injustices. It's not fair. They have a sense of entitlement. They're very narcissistic. Your rules don't apply to me. I can do what I want. They often feel alienated, and they feel that they're outsiders. And because they feel victimized by your organization, they turn that victimization into a justification for them to go harm and shoot somebody, and they externalize blame. This is the shooter in Santa Barbara. It's a 22-year-old kid who was very angry because the girls wouldn't go to bed with him. So he decides, if I can't have him, I'm going to kill him. So he makes this video called The Day of Retribution. And the day he launches his attack, he goes to the sorority house. They wouldn't let him in. They sheltered in place. And then he goes down Isla Vista in California shooting people. I want you to listen to his words because I want to sensitize you to how some of these people think. So if you hear these statements being reported to you, you'll see it in the context of a potential threat.
Hi, Elliot Roger here. Well, this is my last video. It all has to come to this. Tomorrow is the day of retribution. The day in which I will have my revenge against humanity, against all of you. For the last 8 years of my life, ever since I've hit puberty, I've been forced to endure an existence of loneliness, rejection.
Do you hear what he said? I want to get even with all of you. And he means you, you, you. He was angry at the woman who wouldn't go to bed with him, but when he has such a rage for not fitting into society, he will direct that rage at everybody.
And unfulfilled desires, all because girls have never been attracted to me. Girls gave their affection and sex and love to other men, but never to me. I'm 22 years old and I'm still a virgin. I've never even kissed a girl. I've been through college for 2.5 years, more than that actually. And I'm still a virgin. It has been very torturous. College is the time when everyone experiences those things such as sex and fun and pleasure.
But not him.
But in those years, I've had to rot in loneliness. It's not fair. You girls have never been attracted to me. I don't know why you girls aren't attracted to me, but I will punish you all for it. It's an injustice, a crime, because...
Remember we talked about collecting injustices, tremendous rage for feeling excluded or victimized.
I don't know what you don't see in me. I'm the perfect guy. And yet you throw yourselves at all these obnoxious men instead of me, the supreme gentleman. I will punish all of you for it. On the day of retribution, I am going to enter the hottest sorority house of UCSB. And I will slaughter every single spoiled, stuck-up, blonde slut I see inside there.
Look at his thinking. One thought was, I am the supreme gentleman. The next thought is, I will slaughter all of you. See, and both are active in his mind, and he feels justified because they didn't give him homage. He's entitled to harm and kill others.
All those girls that I've desired so much, they would have all rejected me and looked down upon me as an inferior man if I ever made a sexual advance towards them. While they throw themselves at these obnoxious brutes. I'll take great pleasure in slaughtering all of you. You will finally see that I am, in truth, the superior one, the true alpha male.
That's the thought I wanted you to hear. He sees himself as top dog, the true alpha male, when actually he's helpless, he's powerless, he can't affect and get what he wants. Let's go back to our friend in Oregon with the IRA. Why do you identify with these power, hate, scary groups? Because you want to show that you're top dog as a means of denying your helplessness and your ineffectiveness. And you see this in a lot of some of the people who join these groups and movements as a means of acting out. When people make threats of homicide or suicide, when there's self-mutilation, harming animals, the kid in Oxford, was torturing animals. They found a deer head in the drive in Oxford. They didn't say it was him, but it was probably him. The person in Buffalo was torturing animals. A very high-risk threat is when somebody makes a specific threat of harm to an identifiable target. The more they specify a means, a time, a place, and a motive, that is a very credible threat. Did you see the planning that we showed you with the Buffalo guy? You know, getting his guns ready, practicing, doing surveillance, went to the grocery store 2 times before it. You know, he was practicing to try and do it, and those are 911 calls. And correlation is not causation. You can see a lot of these behaviors, and people won't act violently. What's often missing is what we call the igniter variable, a precipitating loss that often pushes somebody over the threshold of impulse control, and then they take action. So if we can identify stressors in people's lives, help them, send them to the EAP, be supportive, maybe we can keep them below the threshold. Precipitating losses are usually loss of a job, loss of a relationship, loss of a status, loss of a loved one. If I can't have her, no one can have her. So by helping people cope, we want to keep them below the acting out with anger. So I wanted to show you this because these are the preventative kind of variables we want to look for so that we can intervene before there's an incident. One of the things that I've learned is that the way to make people very angry is you deny them the morning biological breaks. So why don't we take a 10-minute break, and then when we come back, we're going to go into active shooter survival. What are the techniques? We're going to show you a whole bunch of actual incidents, because in the safety of a training environment, we want to start getting you mentally prepared to look at what they're like so you can experience them emotionally as well as intellectually, and then guide you to develop a plan that can work for you. Okay, thank you. 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. You know, I thought it was valuable to spend a lot of time on behavioral indicators before we get into the survival planning. Because as we indicated, actual active shooter events, while they're terrifying and they're very lethal, they're also very low frequency. And the essence of what you want to do, I think, in your respective organizations is to have a preventative capability so that you can avoid ever being in a situation where you're reactive and then becoming a headline. So that's why we took the time to try and tell you what to look for, who these people are, so maybe you, and when you go back to your respective groups, train people in your groups as to what to look for, and then have the systems in place in order to effectively manage a reported threat. When a shooting starts, it doesn't matter what the person's motive is. It doesn't matter why is he or she doing what they're doing. What matters is, what do I need to know to survive? And, you know, active shooters are not robbers. What does that mean? Well, you know, a robber usually wants to take your money, they'll take your watch, maybe take your car. They got what they want and they usually leave. An active shooter wants to rob you of your life. He wants to rob you, or she wants to rob you of your life. And when you recognize the magnitude of what's at stake, you then may go into a different mental and survival and energized mode because you want to go home that night. And then you may have to draw into your instincts, your survival instincts as to what do I need to do to deal with this threat, you know, particularly if I'm unarmed, that person may be armed. And how would you react? Let's think about it. How would you react if somebody came in here or into a conference room, into your shop floor, into one of your offices, and suddenly said to you, "I'm going to kill you all"? What would you do? What would you do right now if I was here with a gun? What would you do? Pardon me? Okay. Can you say? I was going to say hide, yeah. Okay, so one strategy might be hide. Can I get low, get cover? Can I get out? Can I get out of sight of the shooter? Okay? On the other hand, if we're in an auditorium or a church, if you hide, that may put you out of line of sight, but it may not protect you. What else could you do? Pardon me? Run, okay. Right, fleeing a kill zone is your best survival choice, and if you flee, you keep on going until you're safe. What else would you do? Yeah.
Throw something.
Throw something. Good, what would you throw?
Whatever I have.
Okay, so what you would do is, if I can't hide, do I have an opportunistic weapon that I could throw at the shooter to try and distract them? Most of these guys aren't trained killers. You know, if they go like that, that'll give you seconds to either try and get out, or if you can't get out and you can't hide out and lock out, maybe engage the person. Because if you do nothing, freezing is not a good survival response. So let's elaborate. And one of the things I think you always want to think about is the distance between you and the perpetrator determines your choices. If he's sitting here and I'm here with a weapon, he doesn't have the opportunity really to run. He can't hide. So he can either try throwing something. He wouldn't throw his phone, because I think people would give up their life before they give up their phone, particularly with a kid with TikTok or something. But you know, you've identified some of the core issues, but you also want to look at what are my choices and how do I practice situational awareness, okay? I'm going to play a video. This was a student at Virginia Tech. And while the shooter went into the second floor shooting people, he put his cell phone on outside. There's some wind noise. What I'd like you to do is try counting how many shots you hear fired.
Whoa!
Approximately, how many shots did you hear? 23, 30, 28. The timeline was 1 minute and 10 seconds. The shooter shot 33 people in 4 minutes. What did you just learn about survival? These things happen fast. You don't have time to call a health and safety meeting, do you? Even if you call 911, the average response time is going to be between 3 and 15 minutes, right? So what you just learned is that you are the first responder, police is second responders. In the Aurora Theater in Colorado, police came in 1.5 minutes. In the Tucson Safeway shooting, it took 2 minutes. At Columbine, it took 3 minutes. And then in the Washington Navy Yard, it took 6 minutes. What is your survival plan between those 2 and 6 minutes? And even when law enforcement gets to the scene, they got to locate you, they got to locate the gunman. So your survival is going to be, what are you going to do? You are the first responder, you and the people around you. Individually or collectively, what would you do to survive that event? Mike Tyson said everybody has a plan until the first punch. You know, was sitting at home watching the evening, well, I would do this and I would do that. When the shots go off, it's terrifying if you are there. Unless you've been in the military, you know, you are not trained for combat, and even people trained for combat. It takes 8 weeks to train people how to kill people, and all of a sudden, in a civilian environment, totally unprepared, you got to learn how to survive. What I want to do is replicate for you what happened in the Royal Oak Post Office shooting. Our company with the site responders and coordinated part of the response for that. In the aftermath, we made an active shooter video for the US Postal Service. And I'm going to play a little bit for you right now. We recreated the path of the gunman with the 911 calls that were coming in. I want you to visualize you are in that post office. You are one of the 192 people are there, and the perpetrator's coming in. And as you watch and hear this, I want you to monitor your thoughts, your feelings, your body, and what are you thinking? The other thing I want you to think about, was there any indication of foreseeability? Did anybody there seem to know who the shooter was?
Report that the post office has a shooter, trying to get further information. Is the Royal Post Office has a shooter? No. Okay, where are you? Are you shot? Where is the person at now? He's running around the front of the building. In the front of the building? Why doesn't the front entrance? Can you describe him? His name is Tom McElvey. Tom McElvey. Oh my God, did you see something shot? Okay, are you down? Well, he can't get to you? He can't get to you now? I don't know, there's like a lot of it. Can you describe them? Like maybe 20 people. 20 people shot, she said. Can you describe them? No, I can't. Hurry up, I'll be coming to die.
Emergency?
They took the rail.
Hello?
You're coming to the rail.
Yes, we are. Are you in there?
Yes, I am. Someone in the living relations office.
Okay, well, just settle down. Did anybody see who did the shooting?
No, I didn't see it, but I'm sure it'll.
Okay, one person shot in the Labor Relations Department?
Yes.
Okay, we have people on the way, okay?
You got the Personnel Finance Department now.
We gotta get after well over here.
We got them all on the way.
The guy's outside our door here.
He's outside your door?
Yeah.
Where are you? Pick me up, he's outside the postmaster's door. We got fire department and police on the way. Everybody's on the way up. We're just trying to... We got them all. We got them all. Do you know who he is?
We have no idea yet, ma'am. We are in the middle of a very tense situation. We have absolutely no information at this point.
What are you all feeling? Helplessness, right. What else? Pardon me? Fear, okay. How would you feel if you were in there at this time? Panic, okay. Anybody have any physical reactions? Like stomach upset? Pardon me? Tense. Anybody think back to other kinds of life-threatening or traumatic incidents they were in? Any other reactions somebody would like to share? Yeah. Sympathy for the other people. Okay. And what we did was we just sort of vicariously traumatized you. Fear, panic, confusion. What would I do? What would you do if you were there and this was going on? What would be your plan? Did anybody hear any indications of foreseeability? What were they?
He said he was going to do it.
Yeah, the postmaster said, I think it's the guy who said he was going to do it. That's pretty foreseeable. And remember, a woman said something she was in labor relations. She said, I didn't see him, but I sure know who. The reason that they know who is because the shooter was somebody who was fired a year earlier for very aggressive behavior. It took the National Association of Letter Carriers a year for the arbitration to be heard. During that 1 year period, he made 33 threats of 5 people he would kill if he doesn't win his arbitration. And then when he lost his arbitration, the president of the union was so afraid of him, they didn't see him in person. They left the message on his answering machine. 2 days later, he came in, did exactly what he said he was going to do. He shot some of the people in labor relations. He shot the deputy postmaster. And then when he was cornered by Royal Oak PD at a stairwell, he then shot himself. So the question is, what would you do? What would my thinking be? How could I get a bearing feeling legitimately shock, disbelief, fear, panic, powerlessness, and helplessness? What is your plan? How are you going to survive for the next 10 seconds? The time of a shooting is now. It's happening now. How do you recalibrate your mind to get a fix on something? You know, you didn't go to tennis practice, you didn't take a bunch of lessons on how to do. How do we get a plan? And 100% of all attacks happen at the same time, right now. So if it happens right now, how do we recalibrate our head to say, what do I need to survive right now? And every thought other than what do I need to do now is a burden. Don't say, gee, why didn't I do this? I have an appointment at 2 o'clock this afternoon. You have to start focusing, where is the threat? In other words, what is my distance between myself and the perpetrator? Where are the exits? Are there any covers? Are there any kind of barriers? Are there opportunistic weapons? You know, and the opportunistic weapons, adding machines, computers, laptops, garbage pails, fire extinguishers, anything that I can use to throw and distract somebody. And I have to mobilize my instinct to survive. And we talk about the moment of commitment and the moment of recognition. The moment of commitment is when the bad guy takes out the weapon and starts shooting. That's when the clock starts. The moment of recognition is when you say, you know what, that's not popcorn. You know what, that's not backfire. There's somebody here with a gun, and how many seconds does it take for you to get into the moment of recognition? This isn't real. Shock, disbelief, denial. Yeah, those are human reactions, but those are the ones you have to recognize and then develop a survival plan to overcome. So the moment of commitment is once the person starts shooting, the clock starts ticking against the perpetrator. Remember, estimated time of arrival, 3 minutes? The shooter knows that the cops are going to be there, so they want to usually harvest as many lives as they can. And once the shooter starts, he or she cannot retreat. They have to go the course, okay? And if they're running around, if they're not stationary, their accuracy, and with a revolver, anything beyond 10 or 15 feet, people aren't going to probably be accurate in shooting. And distance is critical for lethality. So if you're pretty far away, you probably have a good chance to run without getting hit. The moment of recognition is what must be going on in your head right now. Blot out everything else. So, you don't know what the pieces of the puzzle are. 1 shooter, 2 shooters, why is he doing it? That's irrelevant. What's relevant is, what is my distance from the perpetrator? Am I going to freeze? I got to break the freeze. I got to rechannel the freeze into a survival action response. And recognize danger. This is a dangerous situation, and let's figure out what do I need to do. My reactions are fight, flight, or freeze, and freezing is not a good survival response. So you're going to have physiological changes. Your blood's going to start pumping, your senses are going to get heightened, because this is an instinctual survival response mammals go into when they're confronted with death. And you have to prepare your mind for survival rather than defeat. Say, I am going to survive this event. Like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? This is hopeless. That's negative thinking. And then, you want to understand what's going on. Replicate the confusion, the chaos. People, guests, visitors, they're going to be running in 400 different directions. Incoming law enforcement is going to come to the scene. There'll be a lot of frantic behaviors on a lot of people. You're going to see blood. You're going to see wounded people. You may see dead people. And this isn't something we see except maybe in a movie. So when we see it, we have to say, this is real. I don't want to become one of the wounded. And then sometimes people say, I got to get out of here. And they'll rush, but they won't think. And very often we go on autopilot. You resort to how you were trained. So when shots fired, you got to recognize danger. You got to monitor your own fight or flight physiological behaviors, because if you freeze, say, well, I went to that class, he said freezing's not a survival response. What you do is you drop to the floor to break the freeze. You look around, see where the perpetrators are. What are your choices in terms of exits, barriers, safe rooms, and then take action. Your goal is to survive the next 10 minutes. Bad guy knows law enforcement's coming. You know law enforcement's coming, but you have to try and survive those 10 minutes. So, denial, shock, and terror. It is terrifying. On the other hand, acknowledge it and then develop a plan and convert fear into survival reactions. Your brain is your most important weapon. Your brain is your most important weapon. Because even if you don't have a weapon, your brain has to think about, what can I do? What are my resources? How can I mobilize different kinds of response? Now, let's take a look at what happened to somebody in the Pulse nightclub shooting. The shooter comes up to this guy, and I want you to listen to what he has. We're going to play a lot of videos for you, and each one's going to have a learning message that I want to imprint in you as you look about what would my choices be. Whoops.
So what happened in that moment where he was coming back in and the door was open and you saw him there?
When he walked in, I didn't know he was there until the young lady that was to the left of me rose her head and said, I'm black. That's when I looked at him in his face for about 2 seconds and just looked at him in his eyes, and I just put my head back down because I didn't want him to think something or anything. I just put my head back down, and he went away like a minute and 30 seconds. He came back, and it was just fire after fire after fire, and in each pause of the gunfire, I just thought that, am I next? Is this going to hurt? Where is he going to shoot me? And that's when the explosion happened. The explosion in the bathroom. Him and the law enforcement, they exchanged gunfire. They took him down. I heard that message coming from them.
What did he do? He froze, right? This is one of the luckiest people alive on the planet. Because when the shooting started and the shooter shot 49 people, the shooter comes up to him, he looks at him, puts his head down. Then what did the shooter do? He walked away for 30 seconds. This person had 30 seconds to flee the kill zone, but he said, well, if I get shot, would it hurt here? If I get shot, would it hurt there? He did not have a plan. He did not recognize the opportunity, and survival is seizing opportunities when they occur. So then the police, set off an incendiary, blew up the brick wall, and then they came in and they shot the bad guy. So this is a very human reaction, and we're going to play an interview with somebody who was in the Virginia Tech classroom where she did the same kind of thing. And we're pointing it out to you because while freezing may be a normal reaction, it's not a good survival reaction. Now, I'm going to play a very upsetting video for you. So I want to caution you about what you're going to see. And again, what we're trying to do in the safety of this training environment is generate choices. Because, the body will not go where the mind has never been. That's what you do for training, right? That's why you have fire drills. Guy comes into this mall, he starts shooting people. After he shoots the first person, people are going to hear shots fired. And then if they had a plan, can we get out, can we flee, can we get cover? So he goes around, shoots a few more people. The last scene, a woman and her 93-year-old mother were in the aisles in the store. And what they do is they just lie down on the floor. Guy comes, they're stationary targets, he murders them. So that's the worst case scenario. So when you're trying to give yourself a justification as to what are my choices, freezing and doing nothing in these situations is usually not a good one.
We hear a lot about the run, hide, fight mentality, but we must recognize that it's not a hard and fast rule. Hi everyone, this is John with today's active self-protection lesson from the Cascade Mall in Burlington, Washington. It's a surveillance video of the deadly shooting rampage that happened there recently that teaches us some important lessons about how run, hide, fight works, about some of the most effective strategies for getting out of the danger zone against a mass shooter, and about how sometimes those strategies don't work.
So our murderer now walks into the mall armed with a Ruger 1022, and he is just going to look for the maximum number of victims that he can get before he runs out of ammo or someone stops him. And you can see him stalking here, looking for his first victim, and the first one he finds, unfortunately, here she is a 16-year-old girl. And you see him come up and get on target, and that's why we say you got to be aware of what's going on around you and see what happens around you so that you can respond instantly. I don't blame her for not.
That becomes the moment of recognition when the shooting starts.
She just gets a second or two to see what's going on, to try to flinch, to get away, to get down. And unfortunately, she does not do that here. And so he is going to put several shots in her. And a 22, we don't say is an optimum defensive round, but we do know that it is absolutely lethal, and it does so here. Here we see a different approach. We see these girls here hear the shooting go on, and they instantly get down, if you notice. They get out of his line of sight, and then they get around into some concealment. And that's incredibly important, because getting out of the line of sight is what will keep that bad guy from seeing you. And because he doesn't see them here, the concealment works every bit as well as cover. They got down out of his line of sight, and then they got behind something that he could not see them. So they couldn't run, so they hid for the moment. But in that run, hide, fight mentality, they didn't just get married to their concealment. The second that they could run, they ran. When we talk about run, hide, fight, your first choice is to run. As soon as they could, they got away from their cover, their concealment, and ran. This man, on the other hand, 61-year-old victim here, and unfortunately, he stayed up. He didn't get down and get out of the line of sight. And because of that, you could probably outrun somebody with a pistol, but with a rifle, it's much harder. And so this guy gets shot multiple times as well because he wasn't able to get out of the danger zone.
If you can't get out and away from there, you got to get down and get behind some kind of concealment. Now, when we talk about run, hide, fight, there's a reason that we put fight at the end. It's your last choice unless you're really trained to do so, but you got to be willing to do so. Here we're going to see people running and they're getting out of the danger zone. But now we're going to see these three people, a 52-year-old clerk, a 64-year-old woman, and her 94-year-old or 95-year-old mother who are going to hide here. They can't run. Don't blame a 95-year-old woman for not being able to run. So they hide, but when the hide doesn't work, you've got to be willing to fight. And the reason for that is what we see here is this guy finds them, and so they don't have any other answers, and he is going to shoot and kill this clerk hiding behind her makeup case, see these two women crouching for their lives, and murder both of them. And now these people have lost their lives. There's no worst outcome that they could possibly have. So that's why we say if you can't run, you cannot hide, you fight with everything you have, because there are absolutely no other ways. Of course, if either of them or any of them had been armed, this would have been a very different outcome. So now we see the guy put his gun down. Why? I think he ran out of ammunition. And so he's just going to run off. And this one is terrible, folks. This man has been caught, was caught several days later, charged with 5 counts of murder. So we see here the reason that we talk about that run, hide, fight mentality. Run if you possibly can. Get out of the danger zone. If you cannot run, get low, get behind cover, and hide. And if you cannot run and you cannot hide, you must fight with everything you have to protect your life and to protect everyone around you.
And you know, there are no great choices, and there are no guaranteed outcomes. And you have to look at every situation in terms of distance from the perpetrator. What are the structural issues? Are there counters? Are there copy machines? Are there exits? Are there barriers that can stop a bullet? Or, you know, there's a difference between cover and concealment. Concealment, you get behind a curtain and maybe the person can't see you. Cover is something that would stop a bullet. So you have to say, once an event like this happens, what is my plan? I have to take action. What are my choices? And you know, who knows what the best choices are going to be, but staying in one place stationary probably is not a good one. And you increase your survival by pre-planning. That's what we're doing today. I'm hoping that everybody who leaves here today will have a plan of what are my choices if I engage an active assailant tonight, this afternoon, or this weekend. You want to be situationally aware. You know, often as health and safety professionals, what do? Well, here are the exits. If there's a fire, you go here, you go there. Why don't we practice this with our family members and friends every time we go anywhere? Where are the exits? How do we get out of this? Where can we go? You know, if you're in a restaurant and somebody's blocking the door, you think creatively, run through the kitchen. If you're in a mall, run into any store. Any store will have back doors where they get stuck. Fleeing the kill zone is always your best choice, okay? And DHS says your choices are to run, hide, and fight. And we're just trying to give you some ideas as to how to do each of those kinds of things. You need to weaponize yourself. You need to say that I am entitled to fight for my life so I can go home to the people I love. And that means doing what's ever necessary to either engage the bad guy individually or collectively, or to get out. Survival is seizing opportunities. They may be fleeting, but you gotta look for it. Remember Louis Pasteur, chance favors the prepared mind. If you're prepared and you know what to look for, you see an opportunity, you say, well, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe you shouldn't. But if that's the best opportunity you have to get out, maybe that is the time to take action. Distance determines choices. So if you can run, and you have a handout, by the way, of this information, have an escape route in mind every time you go anywhere, whether you go to church, whether you go to the mall, whether you go to a restaurant, and whether you're in your place of work. What are the escape routes? Well, you practice them at work in fire drills, right? Why do you have fire drills? Because you want to have muscle memory. If there's a scary situation, what are my choices to get out and to survive? Evacuate even if people don't want to go. I keep on thinking tragically about the World Trade Center. You know, after the first tower was hit, people stayed in the second tower, not believing it was going to happen again. And then everybody who didn't evacuate, you know, above the 91st floor perished. So, and then leave your belongings behind. The videos of Columbine, the two shooters were in the library. This kid left his book bag on the table in the library. So even though he got out of the library, he decides, well, I want my book back. So he goes into the library to get his book bag, and then he gets shot and killed. Your keys, your coats, your possession, nothing is as important as your life. So you need to recognize that and seize opportunities to get out. If you see people, tell them don't come into the kill zone. And when you come out, have your hands open like this. Because if the police are coming, they don't know who the good guys are, and they don't know who the bad guys are. And if you have what we call the hidden hand, you know, like a hand in a pocket, why's your hand in your pocket? Most people are coming out like this. You know, it could be you have a weapon, you have a knife. So they may mistake you for a bad guy and be rough or shoot you. So you want to know how to not present yourself as a threat when law enforcement comes. And then don't move the wounded, because until the shooter is neutralized, no one is safe. Because if you're working with the wounded and then the shooter comes back, you may get shot too. And the police aren't going to attend to the wounded until the scene is secure. And then you call 911 when it's safe to do so that you don't put yourself at further risk. And don't do stupid things.
Hey, yo, bite, don't come bite. Hey, no. Don't. You win.
Okay, another one of my feeble attempts at humor, right? You're all saying, don't give up your day job, right? Let's talk about stupid things in an active shooter scene. If you can flee the kill zone, you keep on fleeing until you're safe. Let's look at what's happening here. This is Times Square. This is for real. See where it says lids? There was a terminated employee who went up to one of the floors, killed his supervisor. He comes downstairs. You know, everybody said there was an active shooter. Now, in high visibility, high value targets, Statue of Liberty, Wall Street, Times Square, Macy's, you know, where the Academy Awards are, downtown Chicago, there are concentrations of uniform and plainclothes police officers. So if people want to, you know, make a statement, they can immediately converge with a sufficient degree of force. So we have two officers over here. When the gunman comes out, he usually has three choices. One, he can try and flee. Two, he can shoot himself. Three, he shoots at the threat, which is the law enforcement people, right? Okay, so we have more police officers coming now, right? Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 officers converging there, right? What are these morons doing? They are in the line of fire, standing behind the police. So if the bad guys start shooting at the cops, they got a very good chance of showing their cell phone videos at their funerals in 2 days. If you have an opportunity to flee a kill zone, you keep on going. I don't know if you remember the Chechen school shootings. where the parent, you had 39 terrorists in the building shooting everybody, and then the parents stand outside a perimeter around the fence. You keep on going so you are safe. You don't stay in a kill zone. Another foolish thing to do is, this happened at the London Bridge. There's a terrorist who had a knife and a machete. So he started stabbing people, and the civilians rushed him. And look at what this guy does. Oops, you're not going to see what he does. What he does is he picks up the knife and he's running away from the terrorist. I mean, he's wearing a suit. When the police come and they see a guy running with a knife, and the call is man with a knife slashing people, this guy has a great chance of getting shot. So, if you have an opportunity to rush, swarm, have the weapon fall, don't pick it up, kick it away, and don't, present it to you. The second thought is hide, shelter in place, lockout. If you choose to lock out or shelter in place, you want to block a door with furniture. Hopefully it's a hardcore door. And, take a copier, a toolkit, desks, put it behind so if the perpetrator tries to come in, it's going to either, one, delay his progress, and he may say, you know what, I know the cops are coming, I'm going to go down to the next place because I'll have more targets there. You want to turn off the lights, shut off your cell phone so it looks like it's, relatively unoccupied, and get away from the door because the person may shoot through the door, and keep out of the line of sight and stay there until the police come. Remember in Oxford, the shooter went to one of the classrooms and he says, "It's okay, bro, let me in." But they figured the cops aren't going to talk like that, and they didn't let him in because if they did, he could have harmed more people. Now, I want to show you how this plays out. In Virginia Tech, you heard this cell phone video, right? Where in a minute and 10 seconds, there were 28, 29 shots. The shooter goes right up to room 206, and he walks in, and that became the moment of commitment. That's when the clock started, okay? There were 18 students in the room. They didn't have a plan. They were so shocked. They didn't know what to do. The shooter went up and down the aisles. Nobody rushed him. Nobody threw book bags at him. Nobody tried to swarm him. And then he wound up killing 10 people. There was no resistance. They were stationary targets. Then he goes into room 204. 204 now, the moment of recognition, they say, there's somebody shooting around here. So what the professor did was he stood behind the door, and another student stood with him and told all the other students to get away from the door. The perpetrator tried to get in, couldn't, shot through the door, killed the student, killed the professor. Their bodies were there, so the guy couldn't open up the door. Then he goes to 205. 205 now had about a minute and a half and 2 minutes to figure out, we got a shooter here, what can we do? So what they did was they barricaded the door, they got away from the door and put desks and furniture behind the door so the bad guy couldn't get into there. He goes back to 206 and starts shooting the people who didn't get killed the first time. And then when the police came, he shot himself. So what I'm trying to point out, even these things when they erupt, say, what is my plan? Can I shelter if I can't get away? Because in a classroom, where are you going to go? Can't hide because what do you got, student and desks like this? So your only choice is maybe to engage. And in any situation, think of Royal Oak. People are going to be screaming, they're going to be panicking, they're not going to know what to do. And there may be some people, who are willing to do something and they may not know what to do. If somebody says, let's get him now, that may mobilize those people out of shock to say, we got no choices, let's go do it. Remember, the flight on 9/11 that crashed in Pennsylvania? 93, thank you. The passengers knew that they were probably going to die, and they figured, let's try and get these guys. So they were able to do enough to disrupt the flight, so the plane crashed in a field rather than in a potential target in Washington, D.C. And what you do makes a difference. This is what the schematic looked like. You see 206, where the red were the people who were dead. 204, there were 2 people who were shot. 205, nobody was shot because they mobilized the survival response, got away from the door. Now, I want you to listen to an interview of one of the girls who was in the first room. And I want you to listen to her thinking, because we want to learn from what she did or didn't do.
We heard the first gunshots. I kind of felt them before I actually heard or saw them, because he's in the hallway. He walked in shooting. It's really hard to convey how quickly it happened. I mean, she's one of the first people that was shot, as well as people that were right there. And he went across the room and just literally went down there was people and just shot everyone individually, one by one. Multiple rounds were fired into each individual, but the first time it just right to left. And my eyes were closed, but I could hear and I could smell and I could sense, because the force was kind of going towards me, that I said to myself, brace yourself, your turn is going to come. And I kind of did this. I was wearing a white polo, so I remember seeing my arms clench. And he shot me in the back the first time, and then he left. He came back. It was scarier.
What did she do? She froze. She closed her eyes. She said, well, it'll hurt. It reminds me of the fellow in the Orlando nightclub. And, these are human reactions, but they're not survival reactions. Are there opportunities that she, or by extension, people could seize to try and change the outcome?
Because the first time he just fired right to left. It was very, very quick. He didn't have time to be afraid. He didn't have time to, scream or think about what was happening. But the second time, you could sense that he was looking to see who was alive. And so I remember I was panting at this point, because I've just been, shot in the back, and it stayed in me. It didn't go through. Sometimes I think bullets do. And I was trying to hold my stomach in to pretend like I was dead, and he shot above my head, which was incredibly scary looking back now, because I looked up and I looked at the wall and I saw where the bullet hole was. And to this day, it's like, why did I move? I should have just played dead as I had. But all in all, he left for a third time. He came back again, so he came in 3 times, and in that time he shot me 3 times. They got in. He killed himself when he.
So he came back 2 times because there were still people who weren't shot and wounded. Well, when he came in, the people who weren't disabled, a choice might have been, let's throw something at him, let's swarm him, rather than just be a stationary target. I think of the mall. The elderly people, okay, where could they go? But the woman who was behind the counter, before he came back, she could have fled if she thought about it and had a plan. She had a bunch of perfume or whatever that stuff is, throw something at him to try and distract or disrupt him. I mean, it's very, very frightening, but the consequences of doing nothing are usually going to be a lot worse. So if those remaining survivors try to swarm the guy, the death count would probably have been lower.
He heard police, and he killed himself in front of our classrooms. It's so quick and so shocking and so scary that you don't have time to have logical thoughts, because I couldn't have even told you that there was a shooting. I knew that something serious was happening. I thought it was an exercise. I thought it was like a social experiment where someone's going to jump out and say, okay, here we go. But I think like I said, with each gunshot, there's a yelp, there's coughing, there's other signals that telling me that something.
Shock, disbelief, denial, this can't be real, because you don't have a context of expecting people to come into a classroom and shoot the place up, right? So she thought it was a social psych experiment, or she thought it was backfire. Remember, one of the things which is part of your plan, when you hear the shots, you know, after the moment of recognition, you got to get oriented. What was that? But once you determine it's probably gunfire, you have to recognize danger and then assess, what are my choices in terms of responding? Well, in the classroom, they maybe could have jumped out the window, second floor, which is probably better than getting killed in the class, or swarming or rushing him because there was no place to hide and there was not an opportunity to flee because the bad guy blocked the door. So as soon as you recognize it, you say, let's get this person, because you're going to have a better chance of surviving than doing nothing.
Is wrong, but I would never have thought back then that what was actually happening was happening, right? We didn't have that like frame of reference. I didn't know what a gun even sounded like. That's why people say they thought it was construction noise. It was a little bit louder than that, but I would never have thought, oh, it must be a firearm. That doesn't, that doesn't stick in reality.
So we have to recognize that bad things can happen. They can happen in your church. They can happen in your workplace, in your hospital, in your school, in a restaurant. And once we recognize what's happening, how do we recalibrate to convert fear into survival responses? So we would look for opportunistic weapons, coats, chairs, containers, a thermos bottle, a cup of coffee, a telephone, cell phone, shop tools. And if we throw this at the individual, maybe we have a chance of surviving. In the Taiwanese church and in the synagogue outside of Texas, remember they seized an opportunity and then they took a chair and hit the bad guy in the head. And at that point, the other people were able to flee. In the church in California, they tied the guy up. One of the persons who lunged at the bad guy got shot and killed, but that sacrifice allowed the other people to then swarm the shooter and then take him down and tie him up. And, this isn't James Bond, and you ain't Wonder Woman, and this ain't the movies. So harm is probably going to happen to many people. The kinds of choices and actions you make can increase or decrease the amount of casualties that will probably be an outcome of the situation. You want to be able to defend yourself. If the door opens inward, then you can put copiers, boxes, furniture, things there. A lot of companies now are selling little door stops so that if there's an intruder, you put it in the door so it's much more difficult for the intruder to get in. If the door opens out, look in the middle over here. You get a lamp cord, you get a belt, you wrap it around the handle, and then you pull and you stay away from the door, because that's going to create resistance. It's going to create delay, and the bad person is going to say, you know what? It's too much trouble getting into this room. I'm going to go to the next room. The clock is ticking. They know the police are coming, and this is a way to increase your chances of survival. So using a belt, lamp cords, computer cords, these are everyday kinds of things that you can use to defend your space. If you have a double conference door, take a lamp cord, put it around both handles, because it's going to create a delay of somebody coming in. Put a piece of furniture there too, so that there'll be resistance there, and then the person says, this is taking too much time, or there's too much trouble here. Okay, and then you consider fighting, and that's scary. I mean, we're socialized, do unto others as you want others to do to you. We don't want to harm people. That's part of our ethic. It's part of our morality. So how do we flip a switch in our own minds that we are justified in fighting? And how do we fight? You know, we go to the gym to work out. Maybe a lot of us haven't taken kung fu lessons and boxing lessons. So what do? You make that decision as a last resort when you can't flee and you can't shelter in place, and the killer is very close. Remember distance, so you can't get away. Your lockdown has been breached, or you're in an open area, and you and your peers are willing to act together collectively. Remember, some people are going to cry, some people are going to freeze, some people are going to pray, some people may not know what to do, and other people will not want to be robbed of their lives, so they say, I got a better chance of swarming this individual than doing nothing. So you look for opportunistic weapons. And then the best time is if the killer sets down his or her weapon, because then you have a chance either to flee or to rush, turns his or her back on you, because then you have a chance to either jump on top, try and take them down, has a weapon malfunction, or, you know, in the mall, the guy ran out of ammunition, or is reloading. Because if she is reloading, the weapon is neutral and you're all on an equal plane. And those are the key minutes to make your decision as to what you want to do. You know, so reloading is going to take a few seconds. Action is faster than reaction. If somebody's over here and I suddenly lunge at that person, they're going to have a moment of recognition. What's going on here? I got the gun. Why are they doing that? And in that hesitation, you gain a tactical advantage. And they'll probably not think, they're not going to come up against me if they don't have any weapons. So that's an opportunity to seize. Let's look at what happened in the Waffle House. Guy comes in, starts shooting a bunch of people. The person that you're going to meet was wounded. But I want you to think his thinking and what he did to help him and the other people survive.
Ending a nearly 36-hour manhunt, the accused gunman, 29-year-old Travis Reinking, opened fire with an assault-style rifle early Sunday morning, fatally wounding 4 people in and outside the restaurant before a customer intervened. James Shaw Jr. managed to tackle the gunman and wrestle away his rifle, undoubtedly saving more lives. Joining us right now is the hero himself, Waffle House hero James Shaw Jr. Mr. Shaw, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and congratulations and thank you to you.
Hey, thank you for inviting me and having me on your show.
It's just incredible what you did. Tell us what was going through your mind. Was this just an immediate reaction? You saw what was happening and you just jumped to try to tackle this guy? What happened?
So by the time he had entered, he had already shot towards the bathroom, and that's when a bullet grazed my upper right elbow. So then I was kind of alert, and I was kind of thinking I have to try to make something happen in this situation.
Think of what he just said. I was shot in the arm, and I figured I got to make something happen. What that tells you is even if you're wounded, don't get out of the fight. Because remember in the classroom, well, if I play dead, maybe the person won't harm me. Well, he came back and reshot everybody. So if you're still wounded and you have the opportunity to resist, and the perpetrator is there, you might want to consider resisting and not giving up. Remember, you want to have a survival as opposed to a defeatist attitude. You've weaponized yourself.
And then once I noticed that he was refilling,
Reloading,
his
yeah.
gun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, reloading his gun. The barrel was down, and I just chose then to, my opportunity to attack, because I didn't see it like I was going to have another window.
So in other words, he looked for an opportunity. The opportunity was when the shooter put down it was an AR-15, when he put down the weapon, you know, he didn't have any bullets in the gun, and he was distracted reloading. That's when this fellow, you know, rushed him, and then the guy fled the store.
Like I said, when he first started coming in, he shot towards the bathroom, and there was probably 6 or 7 of us in the separate bathrooms in the men or women's bathroom. However, I was actually in the hallway because I didn't want to go in the bathroom because there's only one way out. So I didn't want to go in the bathroom. So I just wanted to keep an eye on him.
So he was situationally aware. He looked for exits and escape routes and didn't want to get trapped. So he didn't go into a dead end where he would have been trapped.
And then it worked out in my favor because I saw him reloading, and I just made it up in my mind that if he was going to kill me, he was going to have to work for this kill.
He did not want to be robbed of his life. He was willing to take on an armed assailant rather than to just give up and give in. So, we're looking at choices, and what you do matters. You know, if you freeze, if you don't act, everything is going to have a consequence. Do you remember the French train incident? There was a train coming from Amsterdam to Paris. At one of the stops, a 27-year-old terrorist with an AR-15 gets on the train. And these 3 Americans, they were about 25 feet away, they see the guy with the gun. And what they did is instinctively, they rushed the guy with the gun. Guy was kind of in shock. They knocked him down. The terrorist had a secondary weapon. He had a box cutter. So with the secondary weapon, while these 3 guys and a British citizen were holding the guy down, you know, they cut this guy, they cut his arm, okay? I want you to listen to their thinking, and then also the thinking of this British national who got involved in this situation.
Spencer ran a good 10 meters to get to the guy, and we didn't know that his gun wasn't working or anything like that. Spencer just ran anyway, and if anybody would have gotten shot, it would have been Spencer for sure. Yeah. And we're very lucky that nobody got killed, especially Spencer.
I think Spencer's the real hero. He was the first one to jump on him. He's the one who got cut up. Like, none of us are injured, but Spencer took a few injuries, and he just had no fear. Woke up to basically people ducking. And then I was like, why is everybody ducking? And then I turned around to look, and he had just entered the gunman entered the car with the AK. And then I was like, this is really happening.
Remember, this isn't really happening. Shock, disbelief, denial, numbness, right? But what happened was Spencer sees the threat, and he says, let's go. And that recalibrated everybody's head. You know what? There's no place to hide in a train. It's like a 6-ton long steel tunnel. So they instinctively figured if we don't take this guy down, he can just come and mow us down. So even though his initial reaction was, I don't believe it's real, when the leader said, let's engage, they then took over the guy.
And then the next thing I heard, he just screamed, Spencer, go. And then Spencer got up, he got up, and then I saw them get up, so I got up. And then we just all ran back there, and we tried to, like, do whatever we could to beat him up.
I heard some glass breaking.
This was a British citizen on the train. He doesn't look like he's a member of a SWAT team. But let's listen to his thinking and his decision-making to get involved in this fray, if you will.
And then I saw somebody running down the aisle to the front of the train. So my first reaction was to sit down and hide. Then I heard one guy, American, say, go get him. And I heard another American say, don't you do that, buddy, or something like that. I think that was it. So then I decided that perhaps it was really the only time or only chance was to act as a team and try to take over the terrorist. Well, I suppose he's a terrorist. And so what I then did is I jumped up, and I was actually the fourth person to begin working on the terrorist. My thought was, okay, I'm probably going to die anyway, so let's go.
So he figured he didn't want to be robbed of his life. He was initially saying, well, let's hide, but then he realized that there really wasn't a place to effectively hide. And he says, let's go as a team, let's swarm the person. So the outcome turned out to be good, but one of the things you want to recognize is some people are going to get shot. Look at the church in California. Some people may get killed. There may be a secondary weapon, so even if you pin down the perpetrator, be careful and cautious if there is a secondary weapon, and what you want to do is control their hands, and then wait if you can contain that person until the police come. You can set up an ambush. So if somebody comes in, you form a semicircle, you have opportunistic weapons, a fire extinguisher, a chair, a pitcher, a thermos, and then when somebody comes in, you immediately rush the person from multiple directions and try and, if you get close, push the hand with the weapon down, so if the weapon goes off, it may hit legs of the floor instead of, people in more vulnerable areas in the chest. For those of you in healthcare, when you do 5-point, 4-point training, restraint training, when you got somebody who's, having a meltdown, you train people, you get the right leg, you get the left leg, you get the right arm, you get the left arm. So 4 people can take down or try and control an individual who's being very, very aggressive. So you see somebody, looking at the perpetrator's right leg, the woman's going for the left arm, and then, you can do all that. Now, I'm going to show you what happened in a grocery store, and then let's critique it. What happens is, and these aren't mysteries, I want you to look at it for the purposes of learning. Guy comes in, he has a knife, he's slashing everybody. Let's look at the employee reaction. Let's look at some of the grocer's reactions, okay? There's no audio on this. So here are the employees. They're running around. It's like a meat store. And then they flee. The bad guy is off to the left, and now he's coming out. He has the towel. So remember, your best survival chance is to flee a kill zone, okay? Now, these guys decide to maybe confront the guy. They probably figured, we're 3 beefy guys. This guy, he shouldn't be coming in here. But the man still has a knife, okay? So, they're posturing here, and the perpetrator with the knife is very upset, okay? And while they're engaging him, what's going to happen is a person from the right is going to come in, smash the guy over the head. That created the opportunity, like in the church in Texas, the synagogue there, church there, for the other people to swarm the perpetrator. But let's look at what happens. Here comes the chair. So it disoriented the bad guy. He turns around, looks at the threat. His knife hand was down, but he didn't lose his knife. So now these guys swarm him, and they try and get control, and you're going to watch. The knife hand is flashing, and 3 of the people got cut in the fray. See his hand? He's still slashing. Okay, then they get him down to the floor, and they try and contain him. Okay? And then what they do is what we call the administration of street justice. He's putting on his black gloves. I'll teach you to come into my, convenience store. Okay? So what we're seeing is several strategies. One is a lot of the employees fled the kill zone. These guys for whatever reason, decided to make a stand. 2 of them got slashed. What were they trying to protect? They could have run out the stock doors. So you make a decision. You know, if your kids or your grandkids are there, you may like fight like a tigress. If you're trying to, you know, defend a cheeseburger or a Coke, is that worth getting slashed? So I think you want to think about what are your choices and how you want to respond if in fact you have opportunities to make a choice. Now, this is another situation. It's a Circle K store in Texas. Guy comes in, a bunch of people are shopping. He goes up, he shoots one of the people behind the counter. And then what he does is he brings like a lotto machine to block the escape door. So if I'm one of the 6 shoppers in there, I'm saying, you know what, this is a bad scene. This is not a robbery. This may be, you know, a murder scene. So what would I do? What are my opportunities? Now, maybe if there were stock rooms, they could have thought of fleeing there, but they didn't do it. And then ultimately, one person, a little customer, jumps on this big guy. That created the opportunity for all the other shoppers to swarm him, take stuff, smash him in the head, immobilize him so they could escape. Okay? Let's watch what happened.
A vicious killer gets a beatdown from the people he was holding hostage, and it's all caught on tape. It began as a normal day at a Circle K convenience store in Phoenix. People coming and going, even a police officer. Moments later, 53-year-old Joel McLean Carson walked in waving a gun. He orders a clerk to lock the door and barricades it with a donut stand.
Once you see that, you suddenly realize, I'm a hostage. And, you know, I'm not like the CEO of some company. What is he trying to do? Well, maybe he wants to kill a lot of people because he's not going to get a lot of money robbing these people. So your head has to say, I got to look for opportunities to survive.
The guy got the door blocked off, can't nobody get in.
Authorities say Carson immediately shot and killed Efren Hernandez. Here you see the victim as he walks into the store. There is pandemonium after the first shots are fired. You see one cashier crawling to safety. The staff and customers are ordered to a corner of the store.
He's got a revolver in his right hand. He's pacing the store.
As the suspect wanders the store.
Here's the guy. See, the fella comes in, jumps him, tries to knock down the gun. The other people were huddled behind the counter, but that wasn't going to give him any coverage if he chooses to start shooting them. And then they realize our best choice is now to swarm him.
A hero customer lunges at him, and the other hostages join in on the attack.
Well, they're tackling him. They tackled him.
We asked security expert Pat Brosnan if the hostages did the right thing by fighting back.
They did everything right. It really is a textbook example of where you must bum rush the bad guy. In this case, Carson had already murdered Hernandez in cold blood. He had demonstrated that he was extremely violent, and he promised them it wasn't a robbery, I'm here to kill.
The hero even managed to grab the gun. Then the hostages run for safety.
I'm not surprised by the hidden courage in the ordinary person when they're faced with a loaded weapon and they're faced with an obvious cold-blooded killer.
The suspect remained inside. Then a SWAT team storms the store and apprehends the suspect.
So we want to show you, how do you assess choices? How do you assess the lack of choices? What do? Do you give up, or do you suddenly say, I have a right to survive and I have a right to fight? Now, we're going to go through an actual shooting event. And I want to explain to you what you're going to see, because we're going to analyze it from the survival choices we've been talking about up till now. It's in the Bay County Panhandle area of Florida. It's a sleepy, little community, and they're having a school board meeting. Now, in the middle of this school board meeting, this guy comes in, and he spray paints on the wall a circle with a V in it, and the V was for the movie Vendetta. So he was an anti-government, social structure kind of person. He came in because, remember we talked about precipitating events? His wife was an employee of the school district, and they fired her. The termination wasn't the precipitant for the shooting, to get even. What was her benefits ran out. When her benefits ran out, the termination became real. So now he doesn't have any money, can't feed his family, can't make the payments on his trailer. So he's coming in, he wants to shoot the superintendent that fired his wife. And this is real targeted violence. He's angry at a specific person. So there are a bunch of parents in the auditorium. He says to them, "You leave," because he's not angry at them. He doesn't want to shoot them. He wants to shoot the superintendent. So they leave, and I want you to look how slowly they left. When a gunman says leave, they're picking up their purses, they're turning around. You seize that opportunity to live. Then one of the members of the board, she's wearing a white dress, her name is Ginger. She leaves because he wasn't angry at her. But what Ginger does is she comes back, she has her opportunistic weapon, her purse, she whacks the gun hand, okay? So the guy is distracted, the gun is pointed down, and he just says, now Ginger, now Ginger. He's not mad at her, so he doesn't harm her. And then I want you to look at what the members of the board did or didn't do. Then he walks down from the podium, and then he's in front of them. They try and do some verbal diffusion, which wasn't particularly effective. And then what he does is he picks up his gun, and he starts shooting at the members of the board, okay? And his first shot goes low. It goes into the 3-hole notebook that the superintendent has. I want you to look at what they do or don't do when the shooting starts. Then what happens is the SRO, the police officer, comes in. The bad guy knows he's there. He tries to shoot the police officer, doesn't hit him, and then he shoots himself in the head. So he's below the seating in the auditorium, so you don't see the actual bullet going into his head. And then it's over. Then the superintendent gets up and says something. So the outcome was, it was very, very terrifying. And we're going to analyze all the scenes here to see how can we apply the survival skills we've been talking about, okay?
Everybody in this room, assholes behind that counter, hit the road. Leave.
I want you to look at the people here in front, how long it takes them to pick up their belongings. You know, it's like, let's go out to the park rather than let's try and survive as quickly as we can. They're sitting there, they're not moving.
Hey, sir. John, just let him talk. He's talking. John, go ahead.
Now, I want you to focus your eyes on the doorway behind the gunman. You're going to see Ginger, dressed in white, come out with her opportunistic weapon, her purse. What's the survival opportunity here? His back is turned, he's distracted, the gun is pointed down, he's 2.5 feet from the members aboard. Remember we said action is faster than reaction? If these guys had a plan, the three on the left could have run out the side, got out of the kill zone. The person in the red jacket and then the superintendent who's in the middle could have seized this as an opportunity to jump up, let's swarm him, jump on top of him, knock him down the stairs that are over there, and try and control the gun hand. But they didn't do anything.
Ginger.
He doesn't harm Ginger.
Yes, it's right.
Why is this lady walking into a potential kill zone? Remember we talked about if there's an active shooter, you want other people, get out of here. This is broadcast to 4,000 people because they're videotaping the school board meeting. So everybody in Bay County is watching this.
John, go ahead.
Now this is a close-up. And watch the gun hand, the back.
No. Ginger. No. Ginger. Ginger. Fireball away. Ground where you are.
What's happening here? From a survival point of view, what's happening here? What's the opportunity? He's now 6 feet away from the three guys. The gun is down. He's concentrating on walking down the stairs. So the choices they have is do nothing. Guy's just a redneck trying to mouth off, probably not going to do anything. That's maybe true 999 times out of 1,000, but this was the 1,000th where, they guessed wrong. So they could have jumped up, tried knocking him down the stairs, and then continue running out the exit to get out of the kill zone, but they didn't do it, and they lost their second best survival opportunity, because once he comes in front of them, he's going to be 6 to 7 feet away. They're not going to have access to the gun, and then they're going to be in a very helpless position. They did nothing. And you know what? Maybe doing nothing could have been a good choice, because maybe the guy had to ventilate or scare him, let it go like that. I don't know.
I'm going to die.
Says, I'm going to die today. So remember we talked about shooters at the scene? The last part of their mission is often to kill themselves. So if I hear that and I'm up there, I'm going to say, damn, what can I do so I don't have to die with him?
I'm the one that signed the paper, right? Okay. I don't remember, and I don't know who she is. But let them go.
Now, why do companies have conflict resolution, verbal diffusion training? Remember we talked about affective and predatory violence? If you have an opportunity to talk to somebody, you want to diffuse, reframe, empathize, support, get them to maybe change their way of thinking. Let's see when they talk to this perpetrator. Remember, he's there because he can't feed his kids, he can't make his payments. Do they do anything that addresses his need? So they're trying to dissuade him, give them reasons not to shoot them.
I'm the one that did it. I mean, they don't sign the papers. I'm the only one that signs them. Will you let them go? I mean, but you're obviously upset me. So why are they?
I want you to watch the verbal and nonverbal behavior of the gunman.
I said we needed to have some sales tax from the very beginning. I campaigned on that. Oh, yes, I did. You can look on the material. I said from the beginning to have sales tax is the most.
So the superintendent is talking about taxes and all that. What do you think the gunman's thinking? Do I give a damn about taxes? I can't feed my family. What are you going to do to help me solve my problem, which is to get money to feed my family? So non-verbally, he's saying this gibberish is so irrelevant, he turns around, non-verbally, not even having to listen to it.
Equitable way, because everybody pays it, not just property owners.
Listen to me. Look here. I'm a good guy. I've got a lot with my wife and family. I don't need to die. In the school board here, we just try to do what's best for children. I've been in the system. I was a principal 11 and a half years. I've got a great wife. I've been married to her 40 years. I've got 2 great boys.
Is this good verbal diffusion? What this guy is doing is he's flaunting his success, his great family, and this guy said, I can't put food on my table. So this isn't helping me with my problem. If you're a hostage, what you want to do is develop a relationship with the hostage taker so they see you as a person instead of an object. If a guy wants to kill you because he has a vendetta against you or your organization, you want to think about how can I solve this problem to reframe it. Now the guy comes up with one good idea.
Please, just talk to us. If I can help you get your wife a job somewhere else, I'll be glad to do that.
That would solve the problem. That's a helpful suggestion.
Yes, sir.
Look, see, here's what I don't want to happen. I don't want anybody to...
So the superintendent is becoming boss man again. This is what I don't want to happen. And he's not connecting with the person, their grievance, their needs, their problems. And probably people have been giving this guy orders his whole life. So this isn't a great strategy. Also, he has the gun. So you see how turned off the shooter is.
Just listen to me for a minute. I don't want anybody to get hurt, and I've got a feeling that what you want is the cops come in and kill you because you're mad, because you said you're going to die today. But why? If this isn't worth it. This is a problem. Please.
So now he's begging and pleading rather than he's becoming a problem solver to try and dissuade and diffuse the anger that the perpetrator has. Now, what's going to happen is, you see, he's raised his weapon. When he fires low. I want you to look at what the 3 guys in the left center do or don't do once the shooting starts.
Don't. Please don't. Please.
They're not ducking. They're not ducking.
Stay still! Hear you? Mike, they're not real, I don't think.
Mike is the cop.
I think it's... He had caps, Mike. That's what he wanted right there, Mike. I was trying to talk to him. I knew it.
What a mighty. You okay, Bill?
I'm fine.
You okay?
I'm fine.
Don't get back from me.
That's what he wanted.
Are you okay? But okay. We're all right.
Okay, let's review analytically what we just saw. Once the shooting started, these guys froze. They didn't even duck. They didn't try and throw something to deflect, to distract the shooter, because they just, even as it was happening, didn't have a plan. Why would the superintendent, the guy's there, he's obviously dead with wounds in his head, says, I knew this all along. He was shooting caps. Why would he say that? Remember human reactions to these kinds of situations? Shock, disbelief, denial, and numbness. I don't believe it's real. It's not happening. He couldn't accept the reality of what happened even after it happened. He was in such denial. Because nobody's going to come into my school district in this part of Florida and act like this. That's some big city kind of stuff. Well, it wasn't big city stuff in Oxford or in some of these communities. We have to be prepared for the possibility of violence anywhere. I want you also to notice what the police officer did. He was a 32-year detective that retired from the Panama City Police Department. So he saw that the guy was down. That's the first thing he did to make sure that there was no threat. Then he said to the citizens who he was there to protect, "Are you all okay?" And then he had, an intense reaction. And I wanted us to look at this so you can see what happens in real events with real people, because you are going to have to develop a plan in your own head as to what to do. And these are very, very nice people. We went down there and did a documentary on these shootings. They allocated a half a day. We interviewed Ginger, we interviewed the superintendent, his name is Osfeld. We interviewed Mike Jones, the detective. And we said, "Ginger, tell us what happened." So she says, "Well, when I went home that day, my husband saw the video," because this was all over the internet, "and he screamed at me." And we said, "Why did he scream at you?" He said, "You were safe and you went back into harm's way, and I could be a widower and our 2 kids wouldn't have a mom." And she said, I looked at him and I said, "You know something? This is my work family. I worked with them for 20 years. I care about them. When I saw them as sitting ducks, I felt I had to do something, so I went back with my opportunistic weapon, and I figured if I whacked the guy in the gun hand, something would happen." Well, they didn't have a plan. They froze. So fortunately, she wasn't hurt. And then we spoke to Mike Jones, who was the officer. He had gone to a lot of active shooter trainings. And he said that, we were told that if these things happen, if you're over here, you shoot here, 2 shots, you come here, you shoot here, so you become a moving target to maybe confuse the perpetrator. So the guy initially started shooting where the detective was, but he kept on moving. And then he went up to try and make sure the sheep, very often police officers are sheepdogs. The citizens are the sheep. They swear to take on the protection of the community, and that's what he was doing. And then what they did was they had an auction for Ginger's purse. So they auctioned the purse for $13,000, and the purse manufacturer said, "Whatever you get, we'll double it." So they doubled the amount. They got $26,000, and they put it in a fund to help teach the disabled kids in the district, and they got toys and dolls from all over the world, and then they distributed through a community service group to the kids in the community that didn't have this kind of stuff. And they were very fine, nice people, and they were unprepared that evil could come into their little school board meeting in Panama City. So I think we all have to be prepared for these low frequency but frightening events so we can have a plan. We met with the PD and they gave us all the pictures of the scenes. On the right, there's a hollow core bullet that the guy shot first into the thing, and then everybody eventually got down, and then the pattern was in the ceiling. He didn't fortunately hit any of the members of the board. We said before that the body will not go where the brain has never been. That's why you have training. That's why you are here today, to learn strategies to protect human life, your own, the people, the stakeholders in your respective organizations, because they rely on you to get this training and become emissaries to rehearse, practice, so they, at the end of the day, can also go home to the people they love and the people who love them. So your survival responsibility is to recognize bad things can happen. Look at this weekend, April 4th, there were 63 shootings in the United States. So we are into preparedness, training. What do we do? How do we recognize the threat and the risk? And what are the best choices we can make out of bad choices to try and survive? We practice situational awareness. Every time you go somewhere with your kids, your family, say, if a bad guy came into McDonald's, well, what would you do? I don't know. Well, good. Now what would you do? I don't know. Is there something here you could throw? Where are the exits? How would you escape? And you practice survival skills all the time. And unfortunately, this is becoming a skill we need more of in our society. Mentally rehearse. How would I react? You go to the bank. What if there's a bad guy, pulls out a gun? What would I do? Would I swarm him? Could I mosey towards the door? Could I get out? Are there exits I can go hide? And practice time and time again so that you, in your mind, are comfortable with what are my choices in very frightening, if not deadly, situations. Know your systems to report. Tell everybody in your organization, if you see something, say something. What are the behaviors that you are concerned with? Know your emergency plans and know that there's a force multiplier. If we all work together, we can usually survive best. So we tried to give you, a lot of ideas. There's a lot of emergency resources if you go to FEMA. By the way, everybody got a boss. So before you leave, if you can fill out that white set evaluation form on both sides, I would appreciate it because we have to turn it into MIOSHA in terms of the trainings that we do. So we would greatly appreciate that. When you look at emergency action plans, there's a ton of stuff on the internet, at FEMA, on the Secret Service website. It's not the absence of material to guide you what to do. It's the lack of will and commitment in your respective organizations to not implement violence prevention programs, active shooter training, emergency plans. And then share with your people what you can do. The Department of Homeland Security has all kinds of active shooter preparedness, slideshows, materials that you could then use at your health and safety meetings, staff training meetings. So what we welcome you to do is go to these sites, get the material, have your safety team, safety officers, HR representatives, make time, get a commitment from senior management that this is a value of our company so that we protect everybody. So it's not just making product and giving good service, it's also protecting the lives of all of our people who are the soul of our organization. When you do training, there's a variety of training. There's face-to-face, train the trainer. There are remote, desktop trainings. Figure out what your training delivery system is and then use it. So if you have one site, multiple sites, global sites, you can get a consistent message to all your people showing that you really value their safety. And you can do seminars, workshops, tabletop games, full scale. Go to the local emergency management. Go bother Mr. Hayes here. Say, would you guys like to do some exercises in our company, in our school, in our church? Let them know you, you know them, and then you develop a greater partnership with the law enforcement and protective responses in your community. What you do is you get approval, implement the plan, train a plan, exercise the plan. And then you want to be able to manage the aftermath so you reduce the impact of trauma if an event occurs. And you got to know how to manage social media. Remember the people reactions are shock, disbelief, denial, numbness. Well, now it's shock, disbelief, and CNN. You have to have crisis communication strategies. You need to have templates because sooner or later something's going to happen. You want to have identified spokespeople. You pull out the template. You say that this is an isolated incident that we couldn't have predicted. We're doing everything to restore, make whole. We value human life in our organization. And then you assess the impact of an event on people, operations, loss and risk to protect your brand name. Okay? So, next steps. What do you do when you leave here? You want to institutionalize your violence prevention program. Have policies, a threat assessment team, systems to report, employee awareness training, and you hold all managers, supervisors, union reps, and employees accountable under the General Duty Clause in your OSHA training. If they see something, they have to report it. Because without that early reporting, you lose the opportunity for preventative responses and intervention. Remember, it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. The time for preparedness is today, is this afternoon. To take what you've learned and convert it into training, awareness, and an infrastructure in your organization so everybody who works and comes to your facility not only, feels safe, but is safe. And the message you say is that our company values human life. Thank you very much. We appreciate your being here today, and we're very glad you took the time to come. This afternoon, we're doing a program on how to set up comprehensive threat assessment programs. You're all invited to stay. And again, thank you for your time commitment today. And also, thanks to Canton for orchestrating, allowing us to have this facility, for doing the time and commitment to put this all together so all members of our community can get this knowledge to help them be safe. Thank you all.
If anyone needs a pen to